Good evening, everyone. Good evening and welcome. This is as bad as teaching a class at Cal. My name is Nora Silver, and I'm director of the Center for Nonprofit and Public Leadership here at Haas. And it's my pleasure to welcome you all to the 12th Annual Public Leadership Dinner. We have a wonderful speaker for you here tonight, Sonal Shah, whom you'll hear from in a little while. And I want to invite you to please start on your salads. Just want to take a few minutes to orient us here. Then we're going to let you enjoy your table mates and have some dinner, and then we'll welcome Sonal in just about 40 minutes. So I want to acknowledge first that this has been a really tough year all around. The economy, unemployment, the world, Iran, Afghanistan, Chile, China, Haiti, housing market, foreclosures, city and state governments going bankrupt, colleges getting buffeted. This is inspiring, right? Student fees skyrocketing, and foundations reducing the amount they're paying out by about 8% in 2009. But the good news is it's been a challenging year for us as well. But in fact, in the face of all this, the Center for Nonprofit and Public Leadership here at Haas in Berkeley has shined. And I want to tell you about what we've been doing. And at the end, I want to tell you what it all sums up to. So this year, for the first time, we topped 300 students in our courses. We are serving close to half, 50% of the MBA students at Haas. We offer a couple of key experiential learning courses, and one of them is brand new. In fact, it's just ending tomorrow, and I want to share that one with you. It's an undergraduate course, and we have 25 undergraduates in the Economics of Philanthropy course. This is a course, yes! Let me tell you why it's worth cheering about. This is a course that was designed by undergraduate students. They won the Bears Breaking Boundaries Award for curricular design, not faculty, students. These students had to analyze how to invest $10,000 in local nonprofits to make a difference. They got $10,000 from the Sunshine Lady Foundation, which is Warren Buffett's sister. They chose to invest in the environment and education. 6 teams of students did their due diligence in a manner that would impress any foundation. And at the end of the day, the entire class voted to give their $10,000 to Swords to Plowshares to develop green jobs, and Spark, which provides life-changing apprenticeships to underserved kids in the city in San Francisco. This class was a partnership with the Full Circle Fund and was co-taught by Amy Lesnick, its president. Amy? And Darian Rodriguez-Heyman, former executive director of Craigslist Foundation and about to become author of Nonprofit 101. Darian. Now, I want to tell you, if after tonight, which is a sit-down dinner, you want to get up and have some different kind of fun tomorrow, in this room, 5 to 8 p.m., this class is putting on a symposium for undergraduates throughout the campus on how far can a dollar go. This is what these students are doing. Feel free to join, and would you please join me in giving them a hand as the students rise from Economics of Philanthropy. Come on, guys. Come on, come on, come on. They are our future philanthropists. Another experiential learning class I just want to briefly touch, some of you have heard of. It's called Social Sector Solutions, and we are about to complete our 38th consultation this year. This is a very rigorous course, and it is a partnership with McKinsey & Company, co-taught with Paul Jansen, whom I'll actually introduce in a little while. S-Cubed is about students with McKinsey consultants helping nonprofits in key entrepreneurial ventures, whether it's scaling their venture or expanding it, like Women's Sports Foundation, doing feasibility studies, business plans, metrics, wellness strategy for John Muir Health, our sponsor for the reception this evening, or strategy for Institute at the Golden Gate. This class, S-Cubed, is part of something that's about to be announced, and probably will be in about an hour by our dean, which is our BUILD initiative. It's called Berkeley Innovative Leadership Development. And the idea is that starting next year, all Haas students will be required to take one experiential learning class. S-Cubed is right at the top of the list. Will all of those who are involved with S-Cubed as students or as nonprofits, please raise your hands. Okay. Beyond the classroom, and we really have a very strong bias at the center for getting our students out in the world and practitioners and the wisdom from the world into the classroom. But 5 things I just want to touch on because I think they're so special. One is something that was led and invented by Haas students. It's called the Education Leadership Case Competition. This year we had our 4th annual. It drew 23 teams from top business schools around the country, and the goal was to harness the power of after-school, out-of-class time to prepare students to qualify for Pittsburgh Promises commitment, listen to this, of $10,000 a year for each of 4 years to students in Pittsburgh with 90% attendance and a 2.5 grade point average. Impressive. Haas for Students is the group that organizes and helps fundraise to support our nonprofit and public leadership students doing summer internships. They've been around the world, including sustainable trade branding for small farmers in Mexico with Ashoka, and low-income healthcare with Acumen Fund in Nairobi. We're looking at increases this year from 19, and that has gone up from previous years of 8 and 11. So our students are getting out there around the world helping nonprofit and public sector organizations succeed. Many of you know about our Berkeley Board Fellows program. This year we had 60 business and policy students sitting on 45 nonprofit boards for a total of 7,000 hours of service. Just yesterday, as I was preparing for this talk, I learned that one of our former board fellows, Ben Thornley, where are you? Ben was a board fellow in 07-08. And now in his paid job, he's a director of Insight at Pacific Community Ventures. Yay. But Ben also became the board president of the nonprofit he served as a board fellow, Center Force, that provides health and education services to individuals, families, and communities impacted by incarceration. Thank you, Ben, for doing it so well. Our second Schwab Charitable Philanthropy Speaker Series. 6 wonderful events over the year open to all of you, our students, alumni, community people, philanthropists. This year drew 275 people to events about women in philanthropy, nonprofit consulting, international finance, investment advisors, using philanthropy as a cutting-edge tool for their investees, and the power of philanthropic prizes to drive innovation. As I'm speaking to you, we are bookended by something today that goes on tomorrow, and it's called Global Social Venture Competition. We are the co-sponsors of this. 500 teams from around the world, partnering with business schools in the UK, India, Thailand, France, Korea, China, and Italy. 500 finalists competed for this global competition. 16 finalists presented, and tomorrow the GSVC finals will be held, and the winner will be announced. $25,000 prize for a new social venture that has financial and social impact. An event I just want to give you a heads up on. We are the ongoing sponsor of Craigslist Foundation's Nonprofit Boot Camp. It's the largest gathering of the nonprofit sector in the Bay Area, and it is at Cal again after briefly going down the peninsula a couple of years ago. They are back with us, and it is August 14th of this year, so I welcome you all to have a heads up for that and to plan to attend. It's a very rich mixture of all people interested in social impact. And finally, jobs. So I'm really pleased to announce we have our first postgraduate jobs, 15-month fellowship, courtesy of the David and Lucille Packard Foundation, which, as you know, the foundation world is very hard to access. And Packard Foundation, in its wisdom, was looking for new blood, new ways of doing things, opening the door for next generation, and we have our first 2 Packard Fellows here tonight. One working on public policy for children, the other working on local grant making. This partnership has been covered in the Financial Times. May I ask the fellows, Jessica, Elizabeth, and Jeff Sunshine, who's a program officer at Packard, to please stand for a moment. We can thank you. Okay, and who steers this ship? This year we've had a new board president. For my advisory board, Bob Miller. We've welcomed 4 new board members, and these are the people who keep us on path. These are the people who are looking ahead for us and saying, what's out there on the horizon? What's new, what's interesting, what's the match for our student and alumni skill set, and where should we drive this ship? So I really want to acknowledge them and ask them to stand, if they would, for a minute. Jay, Steve, Phil, Kim, Carolyn, Delphine, Susan, and Braden, please do me the favor of just standing for a moment. Okay, so it's a teacher in me that's thrown a lot of numbers at you. And I wanted to show you the breadth of what we've been doing over the last year. We've thrived, we'll continue to grow. But as I said to you, these numbers come together in a very big and special number for us this year. Last Friday, U.S. News & World Report, which ranks nonprofit programs in business schools across the country, ranked us number 2 in the nation. When the advisory board and I started about 6 years ago, we were number 6. Ahead of us was Harvard, Northwestern, and Stanford. So one year we bypassed Harvard, and then another year we bypassed Northwestern. And this year, a school that I cannot in good conscience name, but it's close by down on the peninsula, we bypassed to become number 2, and we've got a bead on Yale. So, as this is where we've come from, where are we going? And we have a kind of mantra that's in my head as I look ahead at what we're going to do, and that is move beyond the expected. We're going to be bigger, we're going to be bolder. We've adopted the mission of inspiring and empowering future leaders to achieve social impact across the sectors. Last year, 65% of our students said to us, they're really concerned about how they can make social impact across the sectors, not just within nonprofit and public, but working across. So I want to announce 4 initiatives that we're moving forward on. One is our very first research. We're going to have 2 studies. The first is on multi-sector leadership, because we believe that leaders must be conversant with all the sectors in order to know how to lead. Multi-sector leaders that have been here, like Bill Clinton last month or Bill Gates this week, or our former speakers that we've had at this dinner, Leon Panetta, Bill Bradley, Tom Siebel, Leonard Schaefer, and certainly our keynote speaker tonight, Sonal Shah. And we believe that especially future leaders will work across sectors during their lifetimes. They will simultaneously work in one sector and govern in another. They will work in the corporate sector and donate in the philanthropic world. They will serve in public office. They will lead cross-sector partnerships. They will lead teams to address issues like climate change or education or healthcare, all of which have solutions that mean all of us working together across sectors. So what are we going to do? We're going to survey leaders, and we're going to interview them in depth, asking what skills and knowledge do they need to be successful in being multi-sector leaders and working across sectors. What do they wish they had known? And what they wish they had known is going to inform the curriculum that we offer our future students at the business school, and we're going to publish our findings. Now, I wish I could tell you that this was my own original, unique, sole idea, but it wasn't. It was brought to me by someone with whom I teach social sector solutions, the co-founder of McKinsey's social sector practice and director emeritus from McKinsey, Paul Jansen. Stand up for a minute. And our second research study comes to us from far away initially as well. This is research on cutting-edge thinking about social impact, nonprofit networks, beyond scaling socially entrepreneurial organizations, beyond the limitations of any one organization. How do we make greater social impact? And can we do that by working in a network to create greater social change and impact? Because when we look at the scope of the problems, none of us can do it alone. And bringing us this research is our visiting professor from Harvard Business School, whom I hope will stay with us forever, Jane Way Skillern. Jane, would you stand for a moment, please? Our students. We will grow S cubed, so there's more opportunity for students and nonprofits and public agencies. But we're also going to offer more in social entrepreneurship at your request, and we're going to offer more global opportunities in partnership with Dahlberg Global Advisors. I am hoping that we can offer next year a course I would call Philanthropy Forward, which is roll up that undergraduate class of economics and philanthropy, and let's have the MBAs have at it about how they would invest their money in local nonprofits. And services for alumni. We are now looking at how if we're serious about creating multi-sector leaders, how do we support you to do that throughout your lifetimes? So we're looking at board fellows for alumni, and we're looking at S Cube, social sector solutions for alumni. We're going to be all about inspiring and empowering you to create social impact throughout your life. And I want to introduce three people who I personally think embody that. We have an MBA 1941 with us, our oldest Haas alumni, Jim Bancroft. Jim has had Jim. It's not just that Jim has lived long, Jim has lived well. He's had a successful career in asset management and the law, and he's fighting the good fight right now with a local nonprofit to do the right thing. BA 2006, Rebecca Dankner. Rebecca, there you are. Okay. Rebecca, when she was a student here, an undergraduate, studied summer learning loss. She went on to teach for America 2 years in San Jose, and then went to teach at a really model charter school, Think College Now. And she's not only teaching, but she's building the school and their program, as she learned to do, I hope, in her course on Intro to Nonprofits. But Rebecca gave me a huge gift that I want to share with you. Last summer, she brought her fifth graders to Cal to see what a college is like. And we got to take Rebecca's fifth graders into a shite classroom, sit them down and have them ask any question they wanted about college. What I want to share with you is the joy of watching my student become a teacher and a leader. Thank you, Rebecca. And MBA 1980, Bill Lindsay, where are you? Right there. I've been wanting to meet Bill for about 4 years, so finally I had to invite him to the dinner, and he came. Bill came to my attention from the Alumni office, and Alumni wrote in and said, he is our beloved city manager in the city of Orinda. And I thought, that's good. We want people in public sector. And then the next thing I heard was from someone I used to work with on the city council saying, Bill is our city manager in the city of Richmond. And then I was really intrigued. So Bill, thank you for coming. So, our research, our MBA programs, our services for alumni, one other thing we're after this year. I am after our first endowment gift this year. I want to make sure that what we've accomplished and what we're providing is here for future students to help them become multi-sector leaders, to help the school act on its principles of beyond yourself, challenging the status quo, students always, and confidence without attitude. And I want to make sure we provide the education to prepare you all to be multi-sector leaders. So, as you can see, our strategy rests on partnerships. Many of them are represented in the room. Some of you, I hope, are new partnerships. So how can you help us to build? If you find nonprofit and public organizations that could benefit from a student consulting team, let me know, and we want to talk to you about social sector solutions. If you sit on a board that could benefit from the knowledge and skills and enthusiasm of a graduate student, let me know that you might mentor a board fellow. We will be back to you about our multi-sector leaders, many of which are sitting here in this room. And if you have any ideas for support or an endowment, I'd sure like to hear them. So, with that, let me let you enjoy your table mates and your dinner. Thank you for listening to the update. And in about 30, 40 minutes, you will hear from your keynote speaker tonight. Thank you.
Good evening. Good evening. Thank you. Thank you for your attention. It always hurts me to break up conversation that is as lively as this is. Thank you. My name is Rich Lyons. I'm the dean of our Haas School. Very excited to be in the role. And I wanted to say a few things about the school, and then I will introduce our wonderful, wonderful speaker that we're very, very happy to have here today. Just a moment, if I could, on public and nonprofit leadership and the larger ask of business schools these days, right? So society wants more from its business schools. I don't feel uncomfortable saying that. It's very clear, the message. We want more from our business schools. We need more from our leaders. Business schools have an awesome responsibility. We are getting to see the top X of the top Y of the top Z% of the young talent in this society, and we owe society a lot. This is a large responsibility. It's one that we take very seriously. One of the ways that we've been thinking about doing a better job is to do something that maybe is obvious. What is the mission and values? What are the values that tether us? What are the values that give us meaning? Where is the voice in what we do? What is the heartbeat of this wonderful UC Berkeley Haas School? And for the last year and a half, we've been doing introspection as we must. We've talked to a lot of you. We've talked to a lot of external constituencies. We've talked to a lot of internal constituencies. The great organizations in our society invariably are strong, organizations, by which I mean they very deliberately go about the norms and values that define them, that bind the people, the talent, the aspirations to them. And that's very important. That defines great organizations more often than not. Berkeley's business school, the Haas School, has always been a strong culture school, a strong culture institution. But interestingly, we had never actually made that explicit. If you 2 months ago had gone on our website and you had searched for norms or values or principles or culture, you would have found bits and pieces here and there, but you wouldn't have found a stand. Part of how we're responding to this environment is we are taking a stand on values, a very strong stand. It is, in fact, a codification of the values that have always been here. But that's just fine. What do we stand for? What matters to us? Where does our meaning come from? And we recently, in our strategic plan, wrote down 4 values that have been part of this school for a long time. And I'll tell you what those 4 values are in just 1 second, but first I'm going to tell you my favorite current story. My favorite current story is I'm opening my mail last week. I got a handwritten letter from an alum. And the handwritten letter said, I was just reading Cal Business, which is our quarterly alumni magazine, and I saw that the school had written down these defining principles. Handwritten, each of the 4 principles. This person said, even for a 1950 undergraduate alum, these speak to me. These were here when I was here. This is it. Thank you to the Haas School for taking a stand on something that's always been what we've been about. That was a great letter to receive. Let me mention what those 4 things are, and then I will move to our speaker. Those 4 things. Question the status quo. Question the status quo. If that's not Berkeley, I don't know what is. Part of that is having the courage to stand up and speak out when things don't look and feel right? Question the status quo. Number 2, confidence without attitude. Businesses have long come to Berkeley for its business students because we've provided a lot of that, and they weren't getting enough of that. Confidence without attitude. Somebody said to me the other day, real confidence comes without attitude. Number 3, students always. Students always. This isn't just about being curious, because smart people are almost invariably curious. Somebody said it, I thought, wonderfully, maybe even too strong, the other day to me. Said, there are 2 kinds of people, Rich. There's the kind of person that walks into a room among coworkers, and the behavior says, I can learn from you. And there are people that walk into a room, and the behavior says, I don't learn from you. And we've all worked with both kinds of people. Berkeley's always been about the former. Students always is as much about how we relate to other people as it is to how much reading we do. And the 4th one, beyond yourself. Beyond yourself. Right? Invariably, we have to make decisions in our lives and in our careers that put larger interests above our own. This is Berkeley, after all. It's been part of us forever. It's a good time to take a stand on values, especially values that are a codification of what you've been since your beginning. Let me introduce our wonderful speaker tonight. Sonal Shah, and the title is All About Impact, a Results-Oriented Approach to Community Solutions. And by the way, we will have time for Q&A, and there will be microphones. So at the end, we will ask people, be thinking about your questions, we will ask people to stand, raise your hand, will we get a microphone to you. At this exciting and pivotal time in the history of our Haas School and the Center for Nonprofit and Public Leadership, it's my distinct honor to introduce to you our evening speaker tonight, Sonal Shah. Sonal comes to us from the White House, where she is Deputy Assistant to President Obama and Director also of the White House Office of Social Innovation and Civic Participation. She also served as President Obama's Transition Board, on that board, overseeing the technology innovation Government Reform Working Group. Prior to joining the White House, Sonal led Google.org's global development efforts focusing on transparency, openness, and civic participation, as well as growing small and medium-sized enterprises. She also served as vice president of Goldman Sachs, where she led the development of the company's environmental strategy. Before that, Sonal co-founded and directed IndyCorps, a US-based nonprofit offering fellowships for Indian Americans to work on development projects in India. She has worked on trade, outsourcing, post-conflict reconstruction issues at the Center for American Progress, developed and managed policy and advocacy programs for the Center for Global Development. Sonal also worked extensively in Washington, D.C., where she developed intelligent policy initiatives on trade, global development, and reform. From 1995 to 2002, she worked on the U.S. Department of the Treasury, at the U.S. Department of Treasury, later detailed to the National Security Council, the NSC. She is an Aspen Crown Fellow, a Next Generation Fellow. She's won numerous awards. She is widely recognized for innovative, intelligent solutions to global development issues. Please join me in welcoming Sonal Shah as she talks to us.
Dean Lyons, thank you. And it's so great to come after you because you've kind of put the 4 principles out there that hopefully what I talk about will kind of guide how the U.S. government is also thinking about policy and social innovation. But thank you so much for the invitation. Thank you to Nora Silver. It's everybody, she deserves a huge hand for all the things that are taking place. If I could have the successes you do in the 5 years that you've been here, would be golden. But Nora, thank you for the invitation, and thank you for being such a great partner, because I don't know if you've ever invited anybody from the White House, it takes a lot of legal work and a lot of questions, and Nora was very patient with all the questions that had to come through. Paul, it's great to see you, and for all the work that you do and the classes that you're leading, but really you're setting a standard for many universities, so thank you for all of what you're doing. And just some friends that are here, which is great. I just want to acknowledge Maria Echeveste. For those that don't know her, she is at the law school, but also used to be Deputy Chief of Staff at the White House in the Clinton White House, and is a leader in everything. And I just go to her for advice, basically. Amy Lesnick, I know she's here. It's good to see her. And Carla Javits. I've seen many of you in so many different places, so it's great to have you all here. Well, I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about what this office is, why it was set up, and then give you a premise of kind of what we do, and then take questions from you in terms of what your ideas are, what your thoughts are, and also what you think we should be doing. Because as Dean Lyons put it, we're also learning as we go along because we don't know all the answers. And if we believe the premise, which is that the president has put out, the solutions to the world's problems and to the community's problems are in the communities themselves. And what the job of the government is to find those, help grow those, and catalyze more of that innovation across communities, in communities across America, and hopefully around the world. So if that's the premise, then what we need to do is constantly be a learning organization and a learning place. And the way we've approached it from the Office of Social Innovation, which is the first office of its kind, and really says a lot about who the President and First Lady are, because they strongly believe in community, they strongly believe in participation in the community, and they strongly believe that we need to get to community to find those solutions. Creating this office for them was extremely important because it's not just about innovation in business and society, it's also about the innovations that are taking place in the social sector and how do we solve problems. It's not just about how many more people come through the door, it's also how many people graduate from high school, how many people graduate from college, who's getting STEM education, are we getting more minorities through STEM education programs. It's those solutions and getting to solutions that's just as important, and moving from the idea of numbers to getting getting to solutions is what this office is about, and it's why the Office of Social Innovation was created. And in the White House, because we have an ability to work across government agencies and work with government agencies, but also be a bully pulpit for society and what we think are important sets of issues out there. So we approach, and from our office, and we take a few things that are given. One, constantly question what the role of government is. We don't believe government needs to belong in everything. So think about, where does government need to be and what's the role of government? Is it role for bully pulpit? Is it a policy issue? Is it a convening issue? What's the role that government has to play? Because not everything requires government, and sometimes it requires government getting out of the way. So keeping that as a premise and recognizing that we need to figure out what the role of government is. A lot of people come to us and say, but the government should do X, or the government should do Y, and we're constantly questioning and asking, well, what's our role in that? Is it to set a policy? Is it to set a convening role? Or do we even have a role? And if we don't, we have to be fairly clear that's not really the job of this office. So we use that as a premise. Second, the world is becoming more global. So the ideas are everywhere. The ideas aren't just in, some things come from overseas and some things come from domestically that can be taken overseas. But to keep an open mind in terms of how global ideas can also infiltrate into the domestic, and vice versa, how domestic ideas can move global, and how to think about that. And so we approach it in three ways. Our office approaches the ideas in three ways. We look internal and we look external. And when I say internal, I look at how can government operate differently, and then what role can government play in terms of a convener, and the role of government as setting ideas out there. And one is capital. How can government use capital differently? And when I think of capital, we're a big spender, and the government spends a lot of money. And we do it for a lot of issues, everything from healthcare to education to housing to immigration. There's lots of different priorities. But the question is, how do we find the best ideas, and what can government do in finding those best ideas? So we're not starting huge, we're starting small and saying, why don't we find innovative approaches within government that we can take? Capital is a good place to start. So we've started 2 innovation funds, the Social Innovation Fund and the I3 Fund, which I'll talk a little bit about both. But the idea of these innovation funds, Social Innovation Fund is $50 million, based at the Corporation for National and Community Service, which is also a government agency started by President Clinton. And the aim here is to set up a fund which has a 2-to-1 match. The aim here is to set up a fund to find innovative ideas that have shown promise and help them grow. For those of you that run nonprofits, you understand that getting growth capital is the hardest capital to get. And for those of you in business, you take it for granted that growth capital exists if you succeed. If you're doing well, then you have access to hire good people, to expand your workforce. It's not so simple in the nonprofit sector. So thinking about growth capital and how can the government play a role in thinking about growth capital, what the Social Innovation Fund does is provides growth capital to those organizations who have shown promise, who have an idea that can be replicated and have shown to have some proof, and helping those scale and helping them grow or replicate, whichever the organization wants to do. And the I3 Fund, which is based at the Department of Education, is a significantly larger fund. It's an innovation fund. It's called Educate to Innovate, and it's investing in innovation fund. And those funds are $650 million divided into 3 parts. The first part invests in those ideas that have promise, but haven't really proven themselves yet, but they're innovative ideas that really should be thinking about that. The second is taking those organizations that have proven themselves and growing them. And the third is those that have really had proof and have had rigorous evaluations, giving them large-scale capital. And the minimum there is $50 million. So the minimum out of that last pot is $50 million. So here, what's important is the way we're thinking about the way the government can operate. We can look at innovation funds. We can look at different ways of growing organizations. If we want to find solutions, then we should be looking for those organizations that are providing solutions and really investing in them and helping them scale, because that's what government does. We can scale, and we have the ability to scale. What we can't do is we can't be the risk taker all the time. That is not the role of government. And we are not going to be first risk-taking capital. We are not going to test all the new ideas, because we have a responsibility as stewards of taxpayer dollars to look for the best ideas and help them grow. But we are not going to be the risk takers. That, to me, is where we have a partnership with philanthropy. It's where we can have partnerships with grant makers. It's where we can have partnerships to think and have others take some of that early risk for us to then get those ideas and to think about how we can grow them. But we are in part in the education fund doing some risk taking, but not a lot. And we have to be careful, because if we take too much risk and we can't prove that those things work, we are on a yearly we are a yearly cycle with Congress. We have to prove every year that we spent that money well. And that is something that we have to be cognizant of, what the role of government is in that space. So I3 funds, what we're now doing with those funds is we are now going to every agency and saying, wouldn't you be interested in doing these funds? And here's where we leverage the bully pulpit. President and First Lady have really gone out there, both for education and for the Social Innovation Fund, to talk about why these are new ways of thinking about how the government can be innovative. And that's gotten other agencies to say, we could do something different. Now we're talking about not new money, we're talking about repurposing government money. And if not everybody pays attention to how the budget comes out, but the Department of Labor in its 2011 budget has repurposed $260 million to invest in 2 innovation funds. So our job is internal, which is really getting the government to think differently. And the job is also external. So while I've talked about how government can spend money differently and how we can do it, we're also beginning to start convening of conversations around how philanthropy and the private markets can think about new capital markets for the social sector. That's both the social enterprise sector and the nonprofit sector. And can we create new asset classes? How can we create new asset classes? What do we need to do to make information more transparent and more open? So evaluation, metrics. It's not just the concept of evaluation and metrics, but making that publicly available and making that open so we can share that information and others can use that information to make decisions. We as the government are starting on our own, which is we're making more data publicly available out of each of the agencies. The president has mandated every agency has to send in a report on how they're going to make data more publicly available and what they're going to do. It's a hard task. Because how do you standardize data? How do you show how to report it? How can people use it? What ways do you get that information out? Because we haven't thought about those things. We are beginning to think about that, and every agency had a deadline, I think about 3 weeks ago, that they had to turn in their reports on their open government and their transparency initiatives. So that's something that the government's taking leadership in, but we'd like to bring philanthropy and others together to say, how can we do it across the board? And it's not just about the government, but we should think about that, but to create a marketplace of information. So that, and then the third piece of the capital side is, how do we use challenges and prizes and those types of things a little bit differently? Because we need to bring in new players to ideas. It's not just what the government thinks, and it's not just what others think, but how do we bring new players to think about, if we set a goal out there, how can we help achieve that goal? And can we use prizes and challenges in a different manner? And that takes a little bit of work, because the legal structures within government don't allow that to happen. But we're working through that, and we're working on making some of those changes, and that just takes time. The second way we're thinking about it from government is looking at partnerships wholly differently. And to Dean Lyon's point, more than ever, the convergence between business, civil society, government, is greater now than it has been in a long time. Government alone, we know, cannot solve the problem. We know that. Business alone cannot solve the problem, and it's not always business's responsibilities to solve every problem. And civil society needs a place to scale, but they have the ideas and they understand community. And so how do you combine the efforts of the three and think about partnerships in a different way? And we've launched a few partnerships from the White House's perspective, but we're also now working across agencies to do that. Let me give you a couple of partnerships that we've launched. One is called Text for Baby. This idea comes from South Africa, where they used text messaging services to send to every person that needed to get AIDS medication what they needed to do every week, so they came in on time to get their AIDS medication. We've brought this similar type of concept, but here to the United States. And this idea is run by a nonprofit in partnership with government agencies. And what they're doing is they're sending text messages to low-income families, especially mothers who are pregnant, and letting them know what they need to do in each stage of their pregnancy. When we look at data, the data shows that low-income mothers and low-income communities do not necessarily look at the internet, but they use text messaging. So can we take that data and do something with text messaging? Because 90% of mothers in low-income communities use text messaging to get information. So the cell phone companies are offering free texting services. Johnson & Johnson partnering with Department of Health and Human Services, working with CDC, and the military hospitals are all working together to get this message and get this information out to low-income communities. And so they can get a message. All a mother has to do is send in text for baby in English or in Spanish, and they will get signed up into the system, and they can send in questions, and they can get information on what they need to do with each stage of the pregnancy. On top of that, 2 universities have partnered to do research to see how it affects maternal and child mortality in the 3-year period. So it's a 3-year test period, and we're going to test to see how this works. But this is a different way of thinking about partnerships, because business is giving something, government is giving something, and civil society is giving something, but it really requires a problem that we're trying to solve. And the problem we're trying to solve here is addressing maternal and child mortality rates in low-income communities. And can we do this through technology in a way that we've seen it worked in other countries? The second is on another one that the president actually launched, which was on STEM education, science, technology, engineering, and math. It's no secret that we are falling behind in STEM education across the board, and that we want to invest in generating the next generation of scientists, engineers, and mathematicians. And what we've done here is there's a new nonprofit that's been created, and that nonprofit, in working with the government, especially our Office of Science and Technology Policy, has 3 parts to this. One part is the media companies are working with us in terms of how they can get the information about STEM education out to communities and what's the best way to get that out, and they're working on that. Government scientists have been given an opportunity to go work in schools in their neighborhoods to teach math and science education, especially in low-income communities, because there's not enough teachers. And tech companies, R&D companies, and others are working across the country on improving science labs. And what can they do to improve the science labs around the country? Those are just 2 examples of the types of partnerships we're looking at. Now what we're doing is we're taking these principles of these partnerships and going to every agency and training agencies on how they can do partnerships differently. Because it's not so much that the White House office does it, because we will come, we will go, but if it's inculcated into the business of how each agency operates, then it becomes a way of doing business differently. And when we think about doing business differently, it really is getting it all the way down into agencies working differently and how we can set those partnerships up. So when we think about that, and when we think about partnerships, we really think about how can government be a partner and not necessarily just a solution to the problems. And the last part of our office, which is important, is, and it's such a core to who the President and First Lady are, is civic participation. They strongly believe that participating in the communities, government can do its part, but civic participation is an important part of the solution. It is not just about volunteering 10 hours, but it's about volunteering 10 hours to help a child or to help close the summer reading gap, to help someone get through their math homework, but really thinking about solutions. How do we get to solutions? How can, in partnership with what the agencies are doing and what we're doing across the board, can we work with communities across the country about participation to help address some of our toughest challenges that are out there? We can't go another 10 years with the high school graduation rate the way it is. We've got to solve that problem. And some part is policy, some part is money, but some part is us taking responsibility in communities to say we can help close that gap. Is it mentoring that's needed in our communities? Is it participation of parents in schools that's needed? But what is it, and how do we increase that participation? And that's an important part. So participation for solution is really, service to solution is the goal of where we want to get to. We want to create more opportunities for people to participate. How do we train communities to think about how to use volunteerism and how to use participation most effectively to solve problems? And what are the technologies that we can put out there to help people connect to that? So we, a year ago, worked with, I think about 5 technology companies, and the Craigslist Foundation led a lot of this effort, but to create a new technology that aggregated all of the places where you can volunteer in your communities and put it on the government website. It's not run by the government, it's run by a nonprofit, but they're constantly changing the code, and I'll come back to why this is important that somebody else is running this, but that you can find an opportunity by putting in your zip code, and it tells you what's going on in your community and where you can give time, and where you could give where you can find an opportunity to volunteer. And that's important because it is trying to make it easier, but trying to find ways that anyone can participate locally. What's really interesting about this technology, and what's something that we're thinking about in government, is government is not going to come up with the best technologies all the time. It's changing so quickly. I mean, version 1, version 2, version 3, version 4, we can't even keep up. By the time we finish writing the procurement contract, the technology's already changed. So why would government be the leading role of putting the technology out there? But if we can think about new ways of contracting that allow somebody else to create the technology and we can benefit from it, recognizing what our role of government is, that's important because that technology will keep changing with what the needs are, but it's not something that we can do. And we've learned a lot in this process. So when we first started, we had these grand ideals. We were going to do everything overnight and everything was going to change. What we've learned are some really good lessons and something that I think is important for us as we keep moving forward. But one, do small things, but do them well, because those small wins allow you the leeway to try more. Trying to take on big things and then not doing it, especially when you're in a new office, or a new office, whether you're in the government or a new office in a company, it's really making some small successes and using that symbolism to move forward. Second, change just takes time. It is hard. We have to understand the intent of the laws before we can change the laws. And I'll give you an example. One of the biggest examples is the law that Maria, you must know about this. When you were in the Clinton administration, we put in where you can't get too much. You can't ask for too much information from communities. You have to the Paperwork Reduction Act. And the intent of the law is actually really important when we think about it. Is if you ask a community or ask a person coming into a government agency to fill out paperwork, and then you keep asking them to fill out paperwork, it discourages them to apply for the services that they could actually get access to, whether it's health or whether it's education or whether it's EITC or other things. So really thinking through what are the questions you're asking. Now, while that's great, which is important, online, much harder when that same law is applied to online where you want to just survey whether people like the product or whether they're getting good service. You have to go through the same exact legal structures to do that. The Paperwork Reduction Act, which was created, which was for paper, Social Security, all of those things, for online surveys. And now we're in a logjam because every time we have to ask a question, if they say, okay, well, how many people are going to answer it? How many questions will they answer? When will they answer by? Well, I don't know, it's online. We may send it out to 10 million people and get 100,000 answers, but we can't make that guess. But in the current system, we have to be able to answer those questions and to do that. But the point of it here is just to come back to intent again. Even when the government sends out a survey that is meant to be, that is not meant to be required, people take it as required. So if you're an immigrant family, my family is an immigrant family, when they see the government ask them an online survey, they will fill out something because they think it might help their application, right? And again, the intent is important because we have to think through when we ask these questions while we're doing it to get information and to make our services better, how people read it makes a difference. So as we work through the laws, we have to work through what we're trying to do. How do we do it in a way that doesn't send out a signal that we're asking for more information? And trust me, everybody is more than happy to give all of their personal information to Google, but they're not willing to give it to the government. And it's important because privacy is an important issue, and how your information gets used is very important, and there is a large community that cares a lot about that. So as the government, we think about that, and how do we address privacy issues while at the same time try to get information so we can make decisions better, and we can think better, and we can use those surveys to say how do we improve services. But all of that takes time, and those are the things that we've learned in the process of that. But let me come back to what you can do. I mean, this is what the government can do, and we're certainly looking at that. We're also looking at how to work with state and local governments, because it's not just about the federal government. Really, where change is taking place is at the state and local levels, and that's important because they are our partners, they are the implementers, and they are right on the ground, and it matters a lot. So state and local governments matter. But there's parts that government can do, but there's parts that you all can do from not just from the community, but as students. Help build the infrastructure in the communities. when we thought about the stimulus and we thought about how can we get more money to nonprofits and what can we do, we realized that there isn't that much infrastructure that can get that much money out that quickly in the way that governments, in the way that local governments do. If I had to put $10 billion somewhere, where do I put it? Which organization can absorb 10 million and spend it in the 9 months that we needed to get it spent in? And that was a hard question for us to ask. It was a hard question for us to answer, but that infrastructure needs to be built in communities, and parts of what these innovation funds are doing is really building that infrastructure to give more power to community foundations, to build the infrastructure with the local grant-making organizations, but really thinking about that. Second, leadership and skill sets. For nonprofits, it's really hard to get money for growth capital. So if I have 5 stars in my nonprofit, how do I give them the skills to become the leaders, to keep growing that organization? And we need to think about, from a business, from a government, and even from a civil society sector, is how do we start building that next generation of leadership? When we look at the gaps in leadership that will come out both in government and in civil society over the next 10 years, we're gonna have to fill those. So how do we train the next generation of leaders, but also give them a career path in the process of it? Because it can't be that the best thing you can do is leave. If we wanna grow impact, we have to be thinking about that. Bring ideas from around the world and keep changing. We have to think about it in government, but I think we need to do it in the nonprofit sector as well as in the business sector. Be willing to change with the times, because the times are changing fast. And how do we take that information and not get scared with technology and not get scared about the new ideas, but really start incorporating those ideas into who we are and what we are? But we need those ideas from you too, and we need to keep bringing in those ideas. Go work in government. I can't tell you how important it is to get a cohort of people and smart people at all levels, whether it's state, local, or national, to work, because if you want to be innovative, it can't be a lone voice. It needs 50 people in the government that want to be innovative to work together, because I have colleagues, we can do stuff. But we also need those colleagues in state and local governments. And state and local governments have huge impacts in their communities. If you don't think you have an impact at state and local levels, you should talk to people in the state and local governments. You have huge impacts in what you can do and what you have the ability to do. And again, there are places there that need ideas, that need innovation. And we get mayors coming to us all the time. They want to set up offices of innovation. They want to work cross-sector. They're trying to find people who want to come do that. So seek that out, because that's important. Create new programs. I know everybody's like, don't create any more nonprofits, but nonprofits with impact, hugely important. We have got to solve problems, and we have got to start asking whether we're solving problems. I think from a nonprofit perspective, we also need to know if some things aren't working to be willing to close them down. It can't be that we just perpetuate it because we feel good about it. If it's not closing the summer reading gap, if we're not changing the high school dropout rate, if families aren't improving the healthcare, we need to ask those questions and saying, if they're not, let's find the next one that is. And it's a hard question to ask of ourselves, but it's something we need to do, and we need to be willing to say no to things as much as we are willing to say yes to things. From a government perspective, we think about this, we're going into much tighter budget cycles. It's not going to be easy. And if we don't start asking those questions of what's working and what's not working, we're going to be trying to increase programs while at the same time we've got to meet some budget standards. And finally, to all of you, don't give up. You're going to hit that wall so many times, whether you go into a business community or whether you go into the nonprofit community or whether you go into government, and that brick wall comes at you really fast sometimes. But get up and try it again. It's what you do in business, it's what you do in society, but get up and do it, because the number of times you keep hitting that wall, eventually you start making a dent, and eventually a brick falls out. And then you look through and you're like, there's more that can be done, and I can get to the next brick, and I can keep doing that. It's hard work, and I won't tell you that it's easy every single day, but it's hard work, but it's totally worth it. It's like the letter that you received. You get one of those letters and you're like, I can keep going for another month, or I can keep going for another year, or I can keep going for another few years. But there are a lot of people that are counting on those ideas. There are a lot of people in society looking for those ideas, and we have a huge opportunity now to make a difference. It's not just business by itself, or it's not civil society by itself, and it's not government, but together we have an opportunity to make a huge difference. And I urge all of you to think about it, whether you work in government, whether you work in business, or whether you work in civil society, wherever you choose to work, find those partners in those other places and work together to solve problems, because it's not going to be one or the other. You're going to need to find your friends that are working in business to work together. And I will say, think about going in and out of government and in and out of business and in and out of civil society, because those experiences can be carried across the board, and it doesn't seem natural, and it might not seem easy to find, but go seek them out because they exist. But go in and out, because that is when you begin to create your cohorts of people who have worked with you in multiple places. So I will take questions. Thank you so much for the invitation, and I really appreciate it.
Hi, thank you for that. My name is Wellesley Fraser. I'm a recent graduate of Haas, and I'm working in the education sector. I really love your approach and this results-oriented approach. One of the things you mentioned was about metrics. And in education, there's a lot of pushback on, as you know, standardized testing, and that its effects on creativity. I'd love for you to speak on how do you think of creativity versus these metrics, and how do we continue to foster creativity in the sector?
That's great. That's a great question, and in fact, an important one. I don't think it's an either or. I think it's a both and. And we need metrics to know if we're actually getting to a goal or not. And we need creativity to keep changing. I mean, the best organizations, whether you're in business or the nonprofit sector, are constantly creating and changing. It's not that any nonprofit is just looking at their business model and sticking to it. They know what's going on in a community, and they begin to change with that. But it's also capturing those metrics and knowing what we can do with it, and showing others what they can do with that too. Because it's easy to have one group that's doing one thing really well, but how do you replicate it if you don't know what the metrics are that someone's using? And so I don't think creativity and metrics are two separate conversations. I think it's a both and. You can have creativity, but we can also look at metrics to see if we're achieving some goals.
Hi, my name is Amanda. I work for Oakland Unified School District, which is a local, you're probably familiar with this. We're sort of facing financial Armageddon, as I think school districts are across the country. It's not a secret. And I know I3 is very exciting. People are really excited about it. But I'm really struggling with how you make innovation real in an environment where we have to cut $6 to $8 million next year. I don't know how we keep schools open, much less change the way we do business. So I'd love your thoughts.
I'm looking for the easy questions. I'm going to start with asking my own questions next time. I'm just kidding. It is a tough budget environment, and to be fair, I don't think my saying that innovation is everything, or we've got a better approach to it is enough. And while innovation is an important part of the broad agenda, we are in a tough budget environment, and I think that's just a reality. The economy is picking up, thank God. It is jobs, job losses are slowing. There's lots of things that the signals are good, but doesn't take away from the fact that it's a tough budget environment, and we've got to all figure out how we're going to work within that tough budget environment. There is no easy answer on that, and I wish there was, but there's not. And I think we're gonna try to do the best that we can in signaling where we want things to go, whether it's with the I3 fund or the Race to the Top funds or others. But what happens locally and how we manage to go through some of these environments, it's going to be difficult, and I think we're going to have to figure out how to be creative with that. I don't know the best answers, but I think there are many school districts, even in California, that are working to be more creative on how to address that. But it's worth thinking about how to do partnerships differently. Are there ways that you can work with local community to help solve some of that? What are some of the creative ideas that come out of tough situations? In fact, I think necessity sometimes sometimes breeds the greatest creativity. So we should figure those out. And if you find them, let us know too, because I think those things are important as a government for us to be spreading those ideas across government and across the country.
Thank you. My name is Michelle, and I'm a student in public policy. You spoke very, very inspiringly about community involvement, and I wanted to ask you, how does the White House feel about community involvement, but at a global level, at an international level? I'm not American, but I have seen firsthand the difference that a lot of Americans can do when they work abroad, when they can bring this innovation, but they feel like this is a responsibility that they have abroad.
No, it's a great question. The president's hosting the Entrepreneurship Summit next week. A big part of the Entrepreneurship Summit will also be, it's a global entrepreneurship summit, but also be very much about social innovation and social entrepreneurship will be a big part of that agenda. And I think when we think about communities, I put the premise out there, we're much more global today than we've ever been. And how do we bring that same concept of community engagement and community participation across the world? And there's lots of, surprisingly to us, and the Peace Corps actually will tell you this, I think the Peace Corps gets probably 6 requests a week from countries asking how they can set up their own domestic Peace Corps, or how they can set up their own domestic programs in terms of service and engagement. We've had a lot of countries come to us on how they can set up their own social innovation shops. So it's an idea that's growing, and if impact for us is not just what metrics we can set out in terms of number of people participating and others, but the concept and the idea growing beyond our borders, it's getting there. And so we're going to try, and we're working with our State Department colleagues and our National Security Council colleagues to figure out how we can grow that impact and set some models out there. But I think the best we can do for now is set up the right models that others can replicate and use.
Hi, thank you, Director Shah, for coming. My question's about metrics. Two parts to the question. The first part is, I'm a big advocate for metrics, but one of the things that we've certainly experienced in the nonprofit sector is the unintended consequences of some metrics. Let's take program spending versus administration. Or another analogy might be what the consequences have been in the educational arena with U.S. News and World Report's evaluations of colleges. So the first question is, what are you doing around avoiding unintended consequences of metrics? And the second question is about transparency of metrics. If the government is spending a lot of time developing best practices, and there is this drive for open architecture or transparency in the government, are you going to be sharing that with the sector so that it can be replicated elsewhere?
So your first point on metrics and the unintended consequences, absolutely, and it's in fact, we're working with our colleagues at the Office of Management and Budget when we think about evaluation and metrics across the board. We've started a working group, interagency, to think about this question. And as we ask these questions, what are the types of things we're beginning to see? So we too have to become a learning organization, which is how do we use that information? Are we using that information? And what is that showing us in terms of what the impact is? And we've got to train even agencies to do that. So that's a first step that we're taking. And it's true, I think they can have unintended consequences, but that can't also be a reason that we can't go and try because it's too easy to say it's too difficult to do, or we can't use it, or we can't do it. And so one way for us to think about it is how we can start small, working with agencies. OMB, I think, has put out money for agencies to train people on how to train agencies across the board on how to do metrics differently and how they can train their offices that do evaluation most effectively to use that data. And they're really taking an effort to work with agencies to make that work, and we'll be working with them across the board. Regarding transparency, actually, yes, when we talk transparency, it's not just within transparency within government, but it's also making that data publicly available? What are we learning, and how can we put that information out publicly? It takes some time, to be fair, for us, because we have to figure out the data that we get. What did we ask for, and what did people provide? Because you don't want people to compare apples and oranges and say this is what's happening, but really thinking through how do we normalize data so it can be used most effectively. And we've been working a lot with agencies, and certainly Office of Science and Technology Policy has been working a lot with the agencies on normalizing data, as well as OMB. So we're working on that. I don't think it's an easy answer. I think we're going to learn along the way, but it's important that we get there because, again, as budget environments get tighter, we're gonna have to be tougher about that.
The next question is in the back of the house.
Hi, thank you for coming out. My name is Solana Rice. I'm with PolicyLink. And I was wondering if you could speak to shifts in philanthropy and shifts in the private sector in response to the office. You mentioned a case of private companies getting on board with specific projects. Wondering if you've seen a response to building the civic infrastructure, especially from a philanthropic perspective.
Yeah, yes and no, I think, is the best answer to that. It's been great. I mean, we've had a lot of philanthropy that has partnered with government. And I say partner in a loose term. Partner is not necessarily doing everything government wants, but being a partner in the sense that there's parts of things that government can do, and there are parts that philanthropy is doing. And in many ways, it is a partnership in spirit, not necessarily commingled money all the time. But the Let's Move initiative of the First Lady, and certainly the STEM initiative, are a partnership with philanthropy and with the private sector, where their government's providing the framework and they're providing the nonprofit that will help push the framework out. But philanthropy is, the Social Innovation Fund, the I3 Fund, has led to a series of conversations with philanthropy about building the sector and building the infrastructure in the sector. So I think it's going to take some time. I don't think it's going to happen overnight. Even within government, it's not happening overnight. But getting that idea out into philanthropy, where a lot of philanthropy will are matching both the I3 and social innovation funds, it gets that idea out there. And then interestingly, a lot of the businesses are thinking about this, and I think Bank of America Foundation is one of the few that actually gives money for overhead. And they don't just give money to programs; they're actually giving money for the infrastructure. So I think there are business practices that are changing, but I think even for businesses, it has to be somewhat linked to who and what they are. It can't just be that they provide overhead to every nonprofit, but really thinking about how does it mix with who they are as a business, and what is it that links them to the philanthropy that they're doing, and that's a pretty important part. But the conversation is growing. I don't think it's quite fully there, but we're beginning those conversations, and philanthropy is having those conversations, which has been great for us. Not sure where the... Oh, there we go. I have to stop. Thank you.
I'm sorry Sonal couldn't answer all of your questions, but behind the public figures, there are people doing this work and living their lives. And I just want to thank Sonal for two particular things in addition to her wisdom that she shared with us. One is that she flew in this morning, and she's on her way back to the airport now to fly out tonight to speak to us. So that's number one, Sonal. And the second is that the way we invited Sonal, we had no prior connection. I talked to a young person, a young leader in her office, and said, this is what we're about. And Sonal had the grace to listen to her own next generation leader and to say yes to us. So thank you for that. I'd like to thank our sponsors, John Muir Health and Schwab Charitable, as well as our table sponsors, whom I'll spare you mentioning each and every one, but thank you. And there are a couple of people here that really need recognition because they helped us be comfortable and eat well and enjoy one another tonight. And so Mike Genovese, on the back. Mike's new to us and really put himself out on this one. Thank you, Mike. Sherry Squire Mitchell, if you would stand up. Hannah Yang, where are you, Hannah? There you are, okay. And J.C. Rafferty, our events coordinator. Thank you very much. And I want to thank you all for coming tonight, for being open to new ideas and a new way of looking at government. I hope you will hold me accountable for some metrics next year when you come back in 2011. And enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you very much for coming and for your support of the center. Good night.